Hello to everyone, wherever you are, whenever you are. Thank you for tuning in to Talks at Google, and we're going to hear from Adam Kay, who's a fantastic former doctor. But before we do that, I thought it'd be really nice to hear from our very own Vicky Woodall, who has a very personal connection to Adam and to some of the topics we're going to talk about. So, hello, Vicky.
Morning, Matt. How are you doing?
All right. How are you?
Yeah, really good. And do you know what? Really excited to have Adam here today, because actually I haven't met him in person, albeit we are in one of his books. So as you say, like, to have a personal connection, to have Adam coming in today, we're very, very excited, because I think we've all got so much to be thankful for the NHS for, right? And I think you've had a read of the book. I certainly have. And you know, for us personally, our reason to say thank you, and some Googlers may already know this, but actually it's not only for COVID at this very moment in time, but actually our son sadly was diagnosed with a very rare cancer, a very, very aggressive and rare cancer back in 2017. And actually the NHS, we couldn't have depended on them anymore. And they helped save him, essentially. So they saw him through 14 rounds of chemo, 30 rounds of proton therapy. He had part of his spine removed. You know, it was a harrowing year. And yet all the individuals we saw, and here reading some of these stories in here really, really bring it home to me. And actually, you might think, well, what does that mean you get in the book for, Vicky? Because that's not a great story, but actually, like, it was Jack Whitehall that made the connection. So Jack came round visiting the ward at Christmas 2017. He came and joined us playing corridor football, as you do. And it was when Adam reached out to various number of celebrities to be in the book. Jack chose to write about us. So if you've not bought it already, I would thoroughly recommend, because actually this book is full of loads of fantastic stories, and not only it's how we can be grateful for the NHS. And also on top of that, today we're mega fans of Adam's. So we've also got his latest book. I feel like I'm advertising for him already, but joking aside, through George's experience of cancer and everything we've done with the Giant Pledge, and trying to help the NHS ourselves in raising money for the NHS, this book actually helps explain to our children what it was that George went through with his cancer experience. So do you know what? Yeah, we couldn't be more excited to have him today. And as I say, it's a very, very personal reason. So yeah, that's why I'm very excited.
And Vicky, I'm going to ask you to come back and field some questions from our audience. But before we do that, you also are surrounded by George and Giant's Pledge merchandise. And I'd love it if you could give friends and colleagues a bit of an update on your fundraising activities, because you raised an unbelievable amount in the last months. Yeah.
Do you know, yeah, so actually when George was first diagnosed, we saw things that no children should ever experience. It's such a harrowing place to be, but at the Royal Marsden, it was also the most heartwarming place to be. So just 3 days before he was actually diagnosed, we set up what was then called George and the Giant Pledge. We've now raised, over writing a daily blog. You can find it, if you look at giantpledge.com, people can find the longer version of the story. If you look up at Giant Pledge on Instagram or Twitter, you can follow our story, because we still to this day write a daily blog. But yeah, we've now raised, with the help of Googlers, with the help of Jack Whitehall, with the help of hundreds of thousands of people, I kid you not, £1.8 million for the NHS, for the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity, to help each child with cancer. So it's been one hell of a roller coaster. And as I say, even though he's got a 50-50 chance of survival, none of the money's ever been for us. It's all been to fund and support children with cancer and the brilliant NHS staff and all that they do. So yeah, like we also love Adam, because the money from this book and profits from this book also go towards NHS charities together. So all in all, it's a brilliant fundraising feat across the board.
Well, congratulations for what you've done, and our huge respect and support continue to be with you and your family. So, Vicky, we'll be seeing you a bit later to take questions from the audience, but for now, thank you. And it's my pleasure then to introduce you to Adam Kay. As Vicky said, a junior doctor, but also one of the country's best-selling authors. This is going to hurt. His 2017, literally his diaries of being a junior doctor. It's a harrowing, heartwarming, and also incredibly funny read. It's a multi-million bestseller. And 37 different languages, I think it's been translated in, so it's touched people around the world. He also has a live show of the same name. It's sold over 100,000 tickets, and it's just come back. It's on at the Apollo Theatre in London until mid-November. He has another book towards the night shift before Christmas, which is also going to be on at the Palace Theatre between Christmas and the New Year. Both of those in London, if you can get to them. So that's where it started. And then, as Vicky said, published this year, this amazing organ by organ tour of the human body. It says it's complete and completely disgusting. I learned some stuff from it as well. It's not just wee and poo. Mental health is in there and all kinds of things which children should know about. And then this remarkable volume, it's actually 109 stories from celebrities across the spectrum in the UK, all profits to NHS charities together, and to the Lullaby Trust, of which Adam is a patron. It celebrates personal stories of the NHS and the 1.5 million people who work within it. It's already raised over $250,000 for those charities. I kind of picked it up thinking, well, it's going to be a bit of a coffee table book. It's incredibly moving, actually, to read this. So let's say a warm welcome to Adam Kay. Are you there?
I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Adam, so a bit of a build-up for you. Welcome, actually, say welcome back to Google, because you've done one of these before when we were talking about a previous book. But this is quite a remarkable. Volume, actually. Could you tell us a bit about where it came from and how you put it together?
So the idea for Dear NHS sort of came out of a feeling of helplessness. I'm sure I'm not alone through the pandemic wondering what I could do, and that's amplified by loads of my mates still working in the health service, indeed family members. I'm seeing them going onto the front line, literally putting their lives on the line, working so far beyond the call of duty. And I put my hat in the ring when there was a shout out for former doctors, but it turns out they didn't want a gynecologist who's not worked for a decade. And so I tried to think of something practical that I could do, and came up with this idea of a sort of love letter to the NHS, a really big thank you note, so that the people on the front line will know how important the work they're doing is, and also with the idea of raising money for charity, so it can say, thank you in a more practical way. And so I fired off a bunch of emails to everyone I knew who was famous, and any friends of friends of friends who were famous, and basically just to see if there was any appetite for it. And the reason there are 109 entries rather than 100 is everyone said yes. And I assumed it would be like when you're inviting people to a wedding and you sort of do it in stages when people sort of regretfully can't attend. But everyone was a yes. And I mean, the list of names is just off the chart, from like Paul McCartney and Emilia Clarke, Peter Kay, Stephen Fry, Dawn French. I'm so thoroughly proud of what we managed to achieve, and so grateful to all those people who made the book what it is.
And actually, there's quite a variety of different formats, quite a lot of personal stories in there, but some people have written poems and so on. Did you give them any guidance as to what you were looking for, or is it really just what inspired them about the NHS?
An absolute blank check. And I just said, all I want, please, is a story about you or your family that sort of says what the NHS means to you. And I didn't say whether it should be a sentence or a 10,000 word essay, and people interpret it in all sorts of ways. Like brilliantly, Jamie Oliver, his contribution, his best way of saying thank you was a couple of great recipes that people can batch cook and give to the NHS people in their lives. And I was very surprised actually by a lot of the stuff that came back. So, like, for example, Jimmy Carr, who's obviously a fantastically funny comedian. I assumed he was going to write, something hilarious. That's what he does. And instead, what Jimmy sent was this utterly moving, rather wonderful piece about the death of his mother, and talking openly about death and the importance of that. And it's a heartbreaking and quite important read. And to be honest, it all just showed me how important the health service is, and how there isn't anyone who it hasn't touched.
I mean, as I said, I found it really surprising how much richness there was there, and also how moving it was. A few things that jumped out for me, that it ranges from Louis Theroux talking about his testicle, Lee Mack and his prostate, saving Malala's life, Michael Palin being surrounded by doctor fans who got in the way of his treatment, David Tennant's 7-week-old baby, David Skinner and Frank Skinner and David Baddiel, both of them had partners who had a broken toe or a finger cut off, which is interesting. Alex Brooker, really moving story of how he was looked after by Great Ormond Street over so many years. And it goes on and on. Sue Perkins, not surprisingly, with the vacuum cleaner, and Jack Whitehall, his story of meeting George and playing football with him. But there's a huge variety in there, really entertaining stuff. And are there any that particularly moved you, given the background that you had in the health service?
Dawn French, I found particularly moving, again, talking about her mother's final illness. And she paints a very truthful, warts and all depiction of the NHS and doesn't pretend that it's anything it isn't. And she's one of the people who, lots of the people in the book, there was a bit of a thread of people remembering, the names of the staff. And, it's, if I was on a labour ward delivering, maybe 12 babies on a busy day, I don't realistically remember the names of all these people. It's a blur of patients, but it reminds you of the huge impact these individuals in the healthcare service have on the patients. And Dawn's, I was so well. She's a phenomenal writer, and she writes so powerfully. Another one that really sticks out is Graham Norton, who's right at the start of the book. And I guess this is surprising because Graham's been a sort of fixture of our lives. If you switch on telly any time in the last couple of decades, Graham's there, and he told something so personal, and sort of was a surprise somehow, even though he's someone I don't know at all, but you feel you do. He wrote about moving to London from Ireland as a young drama student, and the sort of nervousness he has about moving to a new country away from his family, and he's coming back home after a night out, and he gets stabbed, and he talks about sort of going door to door, trying to find someone who can call him an ambulance. And he writes, talking to the nurse and saying, "I am going to be all right." Yeah. And said the nurse paused before answering. And in that moment, his sort of skin hugged his bones. But he talks about the health service as being this sort of safety net that scooped him up, that was there for him, in place of his family who were no longer there. And it's I'm really, as I say, I'm just very proud of all these contributors. I mean, I basically did nothing. I just sent a bunch of emails. But the book, thanks to the generosity of all these people.
Well, I mean, you're obviously pretty well connected to be able to get this, like you say, amazing array of people. Is there anybody that you tried to get that declined you that we should know about?
I mean, there are two, but I'm probably not going to broadcast it to your audience. We'll do that one over a pint. Okay,
fair enough. It's an unfair question, but you did mention how often the names of the staff stuck in the minds of people. And I guess that's maybe a key to reading your works. Something that is magical about the NHS is obviously the people. It's not the buildings and the clinics and the processes and the technology. It's the people. And I wanted to ask you, like, in this moment that we're in now, and actually just overnight the news stories across Europe of rising case counts and further dramatic measures in many countries. In this moment we're in now, what's wonderful about the NHS and what do you worry about being sort of broken about the NHS? Let's just take stock from your perspective of having been in it, but now having been sort of removed from it for a while.
So, I mean, what's wonderful about the NHS are two things. First of all, are the 1.5 million people who make it up, who pull together, who've always gone so far beyond the call of duty, and never more so than this year, to keep the rest of us on the roads. The second thing that's wonderful about the NHS is what it stands for, that it's free at the point of service, based on clinical needs and not based on your bank balance. And you don't quite realise what an amazing thing it is until you experience other healthcare systems that that operate in a rather different way. And I think the diametric opposite is in the States. I've been unfortunate enough to be ill in the States and need medical assistance a couple of times, and it is a two-tier system. And in any two-tier system, the people who have least, the people who need it the most often, are the people who suffer the most as a result. And I was exsanguinating, bleeding out in not in a life-threatening way, but in a sort of slightly alarming way. And I couldn't get any help until they'd made sure that my insurance was valid, until they'd made sure that they had a backup credit card just in case anything went wrong. And that is not how I think healthcare should be.
I think I may be misremembering it, but I think Chris O'Dowd tells a story of NHS treatment and then going into a labour ward in the US with his wife and having to get the paperwork signed while she's having the contractions. There's just a very different experience of delivery in almost every other kind of country.
Stanley Tucci also talks about, as someone who's lived in the States and then moved to the UK where he now lives, his disbelief that it was free, couldn't work it out because it's so madly different to the other version of doing it. So, but I think what it was founded to do 72 years ago it does us proud as a country. What's wrong with it? The system is totally fit for purpose. The system works. The system just needs a bit more money than it has at the moment. And if I can be boring, there's a concept called health inflation, which is basically the amount of money you need to pump into a healthcare system to provide the same service you did the year before. Everything gets more expensive, obviously, and in healthcare, your population's getting older, there's new drugs, there's new technologies, and so 3% sort of covers it. And the NHS increased by at least 3% in real terms every year for decades and decades and decades. And then over the last decade, that dropped to 1%. And so there wasn't even enough money going in to provide the service they did the year before. And the people who didn't suffer were the patients. The people who suffered were the staff who ended up working double shift. And then it would get, if you're covering two people's jobs, that's sustainable for, a week, a month, maybe a length of maternity leave. But if that's permanent, eventually people will leave, and then it becomes a vicious cycle, and the system gets more and more and more stretched. And now more money's being put into the NHS, which is great, and it's now at or above the 3% mark. But it doesn't make up for a decade where it didn't have that. And so, what I'm saying is, when this pandemic hit, it hit an NHS that didn't really have any fat on its bones. It didn't have the slack in the system that it needed to be able to provide the service it wanted it to do. But the NHS didn't collapse. And the reason it didn't collapse is these people who were already giving everything gave somehow even more and kept it all together. And I would say that was, to a large extent, despite the decisions that were being made, rather than because of the decisions that were being made, that the NHS survived.
And in this book, and just looking at the dates, it's almost 10 years exactly that you left the NHS, or you sort of stopped being a doctor. But even in this, it's very apparent how long the hours that you're working, how much you're covering shifts, how impossible it is. A constant repeating story of missed weddings and births and friends and all kinds of social engagements because of that cover. And that was before the 10 years of...
Those are the good old days. Yeah.
And one of the things I've heard you talk about before and be interested, because in the context of your anatomy book, which is obviously going to inspire and energize, hopefully, lots of young people about health and potentially the medical profession, you're quite critical of the way in which we make choices about careers and how you became a doctor and how difficult it is to sort of identify who might be suitable for these kind of careers. Can maybe tell us a bit about your views on that?
Yes. Having just slagged off America, I'm now going to point out one thing America does really well, I think, and that is you decide to be a doctor generally as a postgraduate degree. So you're probably in your early 20s, you've got a bit of life experience under your belt, you've probably left home, you've probably had to earn some money, you've maybe had a relationship, you're sort of, your worldview has got a wider angle than what happens in the UK, which is it's a decision you make when you're 16, basically, when you choose the A-level or higher that the medical schools want you to have. And 16 is obviously a terrible age to make any decisions, but to make the decision of what you want to do for the rest of your life, I'm not sure you have your eyes wide open. And then the medical schools, they recruit on the basis of having loads of, A's at A-level and loads of extracurricular activities. If you've done your work experience with a surgeon or whatever, but none of this stuff actually sort of digs into the fact that it's a job about communication, that it's a job that is stressful, that has a psychological toll to it, and I think that's something that we do need to improve, because certainly I didn't have any idea what the job was really about until I actually started doing it. And I went into working on labels, which was, one of the most high octane, cutting edge frontline bits of medicine. And it was only when bad things started to happen, I realized that I'd never been taught how to cope with the bad stuff. And in fact, these diaries were basically my way of looking for the light amongst the dark. It was my coping mechanism in the absence of anyone having taught me a proper coping mechanism.
And I mean, I know this through friends who've been in a similar position, but the lack of sort of mental health support and counselling for the kinds of things that you were dealing with, I think you said you chose obs and gynae because of the sort of tremendous highs and the ability to actually help people in need, but that also comes with tremendous lows, and there was nowhere to turn for any support on anything like that.
No, there just wasn't, and it's getting a bit better now. Lots of people are banging the drum for looking after the people who look after us, and I eventually left the profession when I had a really bad day at work, and I won't go into exactly what happened, but all you ever want is a healthy mum and a healthy baby from every case. And this was one of the awful situations where we ended up with neither of those two things. And I realised that I just didn't have thick enough armour, or made of the wrong stuff, or whatever it was, and ended up leaving. And at the time it happened, it was like I said I'd sprained my ankle or something. Oh no, that's awful, you're all right. But obviously you can do clinic in the morning, right? And you work in a big organisation. If you worked in an organisation where one member of staff took their life every single week, which is what happens to doctors in the NHS, I think that would be considered a crisis, and there would be huge efforts made to address this. The NHS does need to get better at looking after its own staff.
I mean, that's a terrible statistic, and that's current.
Yes. That was an article published in the British Medical Journal, the BMJ, by Claire Gerarda last year, and it's a crisis.
And do you think that some good can come of the current pandemic, in terms of, you mentioned kind of an increase finally in funding for the NHS? I guess there's been changes as well with technology in remote diagnoses and remote consultations happening. Are there some things that you think will shift for the better as a result of this period that we're in?
I think we have to look for the positives when we're in such a difficult place, and I think there will doubtless be positives from basic things like community cohesion. The fact that people are pulling together and making sure that the elderly people down the end of their road are getting the food and the groceries that they need when they can't leave the house. I think support and love for the NHS has never been has never been higher. And I think that if there's ever an existential threat to its existence, then people will fight extremely hard for it, harder than ever before. I think that there has actually been more of an emphasis on the well-being of staff, and there have been initiatives like airlines rather wonderfully have provided their staff to man rooms for doctors and nurses and midwives and everyone to hang out in, where they can get a cup of coffee and read a newspaper and just sit down for 10 minutes. Little things like that. They might sound small, but they are actually very important for the well-being of staff. And it's technology is a complicated one. There are lots of examples where not being able to see someone in person makes things worse, but there are also examples where it makes things much better. A friend of mine works in a very remote area, and his patients travel often hundreds of miles, because it's a sort of specialist area of medicine he works in, and he's been saying for years, can we not do some sort of remote thing? So for like follow-up consultations, I'm sure we could do this over the phone or over the internet. And he got the answer again and again for years that for reasons of confidentiality and this and that, and we don't have the technology. All of a sudden, when the virus hit, this service was up and running within something like a fortnight, and he hopes will continue for appropriate patients. When we're on the other side of this, which will hopefully be soon, obviously. It's just, I think medicine, as with every industry, has we've learned that a lot of things that we assumed we had to go in to do, you don't necessarily need to go in to do.
As we're on the topic of technology and medicine, and this is Talks at Google, I should probably ask you about your views on the merits or otherwise of Googling health information in your experience. So tell us how you think that has changed things, and what the issues are, and maybe the benefits are as well of that.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's hugely important for patients to be informed. That's vital. And I think the days are now gladly long gone whereby the doctor would be this patrician figure saying, this is what you must do. If a doctor tells you that, actually the chances are very low that you'll do what you're told. It's all a discussion between the doctor and the patient and their family about which option to best go down. And this works best when the patient knows the most about their condition. And the internet has been the most enormous benefit. The flip side of it is you can create something that we know as a cyberchondriac, which is basically if you Google any one symptom or two symptoms, you will find a website telling you are definitely going to die. And so it isn't necessarily always good for the patient's mental well-being. You've got your appointment with your GP in a week. You've pretty much decided you're going to die. That's an unpleasant week until the doctor can say, I think it probably is just a bit of a headache. It's but I mean, the truth of it is, when the doctor gives you a specimen pot and sends you off to the toilet for a urine sample, and you're not quite sure why you're giving it, but I mean, they're the doctor, they probably know best. Chances are that they're using those 2 minutes to quickly Google your symptoms. So, I mean, as doctors, I was certainly very grateful for having unlimited resources at my fingertips.
I'll watch out for that next time I'm in that situation. Thank you.
If they say, I'm just going to look up your results, and they twisted the screen, they're probably also Googling at that point, trying to describe a rash urgently.
So it's a mixed blessing, but a more informed patient and doctor is probably a better thing in your view over time, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. I mean, technology has immeasurably changed what medicine looks like. When I was in my first year working as a doctor, if someone had an X-ray, you needed to find the physical X-ray and hold it up to a light box, and chances are a quarter of the time you couldn't find it and been filed in the wrong place. a relatively short time ago, but it feels absolutely bananas that was the case. Now, you just sort of, you tap it onto your computer and it appears right there in front of you. So yeah, you can't be a Luddite and work in medicine. There are huge numbers of technological jumps in every generation of doctors.
Now, throughout your medical career, you were noting down, diaries of what had been happening. You've obviously got a tremendous sense of what's funny and humorous. There's an awful lot of, literally laugh out loud moments in your story. But how did you make the transition from a doctor keeping a diary to leaving the health service and starting to get into comedy? How did that happen?
Yeah, it basically happened because I didn't have a plan B at all. Because I'd gone straight from school to medical school and then straight into working as a doctor, I'd never even had like 3 months where I worked as a helping out the gardener, where I didn't have any other idea. All I knew is something I'd done in the bit was try to write like funny sketches and songs and things. And I thought, to be honest, I thought I would be back in medicine in 6 to 12 months, retraining right at the bottom in a different specialty, maybe general practice or something that I felt like I might be better suited to. And it was sheer luck that trying something that I had an interest in ended up taking off. I was given breaks by some very kind people at the BBC, and I ended up writing on various TV shows. Did a bit of performing, and it was sheer luck that I landed on my feet with this, that I didn't end up going back when as soon as I hit my maximum overdraft. But yeah, it's certainly an unusual career, and I didn't, to be honest, ever think that I would end up being a writer. These diaries I'd written were private and personal, and they just sat in a shoebox at the bottom of a filing cabinet. And you might remember about 4 or 5 years ago, the junior doctors ended up going on strike. There was a disagreement about a contract, and I felt that the doctors weren't getting their side of the story across, and it was sort of heartbreaking hearing sort of misinformation that because the government has got an extremely loud voice, doctors have got a very quiet voice because they're at work 100 hours a week being doctors. So that fired me up to get these diaries published, thinking that if 1,000 people maybe even read what it was like on the front line, then next time round that would be another 1,000 people who would be on the doctor's side. As it happens, it really took off a bit better than that, and I'm extremely grateful to all those people who've read it.
Because you actually you end your book with an open letter to the Secretary of State, which is very heartfelt, in which you sort of advised that perhaps they should spend some time working with doctors to understand the frontline reality of the health service. And obviously it's an enormous bureaucracy to run that kind of organization with 1.5 million staff and so on, but it is a challenge, isn't it, for one politician to be at the helm of something so enormous and so complicated? It
is. I absolutely stand by that. And it's a very strange system that one day you can be in charge of culture, and then the next day you're in charge of health, and then the day after that you're in charge of the military, and then and then you're in charge of the treasury. I don't understand it, but I think the very least these people can do is understand exactly what it's like on the front line. There's been a bit of a recurring theme over the last year of doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals not being listened to. And there was obviously a bit of a debacle with the protective equipment, and doctors and nurses were saying we don't have enough protective equipment, and for whatever reason the government was saying don't listen to them, they don't know what they're talking about. They do know what they're talking about. They've got no skin in the game, they've got no ulterior motive whatsoever. It's all about the health and well-being of the people they're trying to look after, and I beg politicians to realize that. And I think that actually seeing them in action, at work is the best way to understand it. And I'm sure the same is true for any business. If you don't know what the people who are doing the jobs on the front line are up to, then I'm not sure that that you can adequately do your job at the top.
Absolutely. I'm just writing that down. That sounds like good advice. Can I ask you a bit? We touched on the reasons for becoming a doctor and going into health. What were the reasons behind publishing a book that was very squarely targeted at children? What are you aiming to do there?
So, I mean, first of all, we're clearly going to need lots and lots of doctors, so we might as well recruit them now. I think ultimately, I was always fascinated by the body and the way it works and the ways it sometimes doesn't work from a young age. And I guess I've always had this slight confusion that it's never had particularly high billing as a cool thing for kids, certainly compared to space and dinosaurs, which are obviously brilliant. But I think medicine is right up there, and I think maybe it's because kids are forced to learn about medicine, and science and biology lessons. And anytime you're sat on an uncomfortable chair and it's up on the whiteboard in front of you, that probably decreases your enjoyment a little. I just wanted to share my enthusiasm for the human body, which is the most incredible piece of equipment. It's certainly the most complicated bit of equipment. Like the brain has 100 trillion different connections. 100 trillion is a lot. That's the number of stars in 1,000 galaxies. If you had 100 trillion pounds, you could buy every house on the planet. It's this enormous, almost inconceivable number, and everyone's brains has got that many connections in it. I just wanted to share that, and also the disgusting stuff that I'm pretty sure that kids like, and also to touch on the stuff that is sort of slightly more difficult and sometimes slightly harder for adults to know how to address, like when things don't go exactly to plan, like asthma and diabetes and epilepsy that kids and their mates might know about. Also things like mental health, and talking about anxiety and depression, and talking about body image and smoking and alcohol and all these stuff that's really important. And it's very easy for me to write about, because I can go away, I can look up the very best way to talk about difficult things. But often I suspect parents feel a bit ambushed, like they don't have the right answer to give.
Thank you. If you're watching live, then do please submit your questions. We'll come to some audience questions via Vicky Woodall in a moment. Before we do that, Adam, you're currently doing live stand-up. I think your shows have had over 100,000 people in them in the past. What's it like to be in theatres in a controlled experience with reduced capacity and people in masks? What's that experience like?
It's different, but I'm so glad that it's happening, because there are two options. One is there is no live theatre, there are no live events, and the other one is we adapt and change. And in terms of the theatre, that means an audience who wears masks. It means social distancing. So the theatre I'm in normally holds the best part of 1,000 people. It's now 300 people. So new space, and you're ordering drinks using your phone rather than queuing at bars. One-way system, hand gels, temperature checks. It's a very different experience, but the audience reaction I've had has been, I'm going to say, better than before the pandemic, because this is a group of people who I think have been desperate to have some semblance of normality, to get back to the theatre, to enjoy art not through their screens. And it's obviously great that we have been able to access art in various forms online, but nothing beats being in a comfy velvet chair and looking up at a stage. So I'm so glad that I've been able to be a part of getting the West End back on its feet.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important part of our cultural life and so hard to access at the moment. So it's great to see theatres open. We'll see how it lasts, right? So you've got another show due over Christmas, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to enjoy that kind of facility despite the government.
I mean, as long as it's safe, I'm happy to support the arts. And I think people sometimes don't realise that the people you see on the stage are the tiniest fraction of the people who are involved in the theatre industry, the sound techs and the lighting and the carpenters and the stage managers and the box office. Thousands and thousands of people involved with the theatre, and often, sadly, they've fallen a bit between the gaps of government funding. So it's really great that they can get back to work, and even more great that audiences can experience theatre in a safe way.
And how's lockdown been for you as somebody who's writing a lot? Has it meant that you've been able to get more done? Obviously, you've been extremely busy on publishing the NHS book, but do you see that there are different ways that you've been able to get through this period? And how do you have any advice for the rest of us on how to cope with the uncertainty and the challenges of being under these different measures?
I mean, I've been extremely lucky, and I know that. I haven't lost anyone who's close to me. The elderly and the vulnerable people in my life have thankfully been safe. And that is obviously not the case for tens of thousands of families. I'm also very privileged in that I have a garden, and I've got friends who live on the 14th floor of blocks of flats without a balcony, and often with a 1-year-old, and I really feel for people whose lockdowns have looked like that, and I work from home. As a writer, so in a way it hasn't been the hugest change, but lockdown is tremendously difficult for lots of people, and that's why I'm very glad that I'm not one of the people making the decisions about what you do. It isn't as simple as lockdown equals good, and that will sort everything out. It has huge wide-ranging implications for people, and and their mental well-being is one of them. The answer isn't simple, and there are obviously many aspects to it, but the big thing is making sure that you still have a support network, and it's obviously much harder when you can't see people in person, but it is possible, and I think we all have a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to think about the people in our lives who might be struggling more than we are, and to look out for them. And that's something I've tried to do a bit, and it's something I can definitely do a lot more.
Thank you for sharing that. And as you look forward, and I know you're not an expert on the pandemic like any of us, but how do you see things unfolding in coming months? Do you see areas for hope? Do you hold out sort of vaccines as being the way that we're going to get out of this, or do we have to expect to be in some kind of regulations for a long period to come?
I think it's probably a bit of both. I think ultimately vaccines are the best chance of steering away through this, but I think people would be wrong to think that a vaccine is going to appear and then a week later the virus is going to disappear. I think there will be a prolonged period of learning to adapt and change the way we do things and coexist with this virus. I suspect it might exist in a way that is obviously a very different bug to influenza, but the way that we know that that's part of our lives, and we know that there's vaccination for vulnerable people. I think that's more along the lines we should think about it. Quite how the rest of the year is going to play out, I don't really know. I would say though that this virus has behaved and will continue to behave predictably, and there's nothing magic about England that doesn't apply to France and Germany and Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and there's nothing that pluck and spirit will help the viruses behave predictably, and I fear we're in the foothills of it all about to get worse.
Yeah, it seems that despite the huge array of government responses in lots of different countries, that most similar European countries are moving in a very similar direction at the moment. So I'm sure you're right about that. One of the things you've obviously got an immense talent for, Adam, is finding humanity and humour in even the most extreme situations. Are you finding humour still as you go through life? Are you finding moments of inspiration and humanity that touch you and kind of feed that creative side of your personality?
I think it does. It still remains my coping mechanism, and I continue to keep a diary. And I do find, looking back through my diaries of when I look back through months and years, when life is easier, I write a lot less, and when life is difficult, I write a lot. I like to write a lot more, and we all need to think about how we cope. And I realised that my advice isn't necessarily that everyone should go and write a diary, but everyone should have some kind of crutch.
Absolutely. Well, let me turn now to Vicky. I think we've got a couple of questions have flooded in from our audience, our live audience. Hi, Vicky.
Hey there again. We have indeed, actually. Can we bring up Lorraine Martin's question here? She's thank you for talking to us today, Adam. Given that people are in hospital at the moment and are not allowed any visitors, what's the one thing you think their friends and family can do from afar to help the most?
Oh, it's so difficult, and I do feel really desperately for people who can't visit their loved ones in hospital. I don't know if there's an easy answer. I'm sure it's a case of letting them know that they're not alone. It's very isolating being in hospital, and as both a patient and as a relative, I know that the importance of checking in. And if it can't be in person, then if it can be digitally, or even a card or a letter, or just to remind them that they are loved, even if they can't hug anyone.
It's harrowing, isn't it? It really is difficult. And actually, we bring up Lottie's question because it's kind of following on the NHS theme as well. Do you have any advice for someone like yourself that's left the NHS and they're at a crossroads whether to go back or not? Asking for a friend.
It's such a personal thing, and I hugely miss working in the NHS. I know obviously the arts have huge value, immeasurable value, but it's obviously a number of degrees of separation from what I do, and hopefully making the odd person laugh, and the job I used to do, which is working on a labour ward, saving a baby's life, saving a mum's life potentially, and I would frequently drive home 3 hours late, splattered with blood, exhausted, dinner and the dog, but I still had a smile on my face, because nothing beats that feeling of doing something sort of good, useful. And I dare say that I will end up back in the health service in some capacity when I've reached the end of my shelf life as an author, a performer, which everyone obviously does. I think I've done my last cesarean section, but I'd love to be involved back with educating medical students or doctors, or maybe at the policy side of things. But there is an inexorable draw for people who used to work in the health service back to the health service, and it's a question of working out if you want to go back, in what way and at what time. But I think anyone who's ever left, that it never leaves you, that you feel you should head back.
I mean, quite clearly, even from your books now, you're still educating children. You're educating my children at this moment in time, So I think you've still got it. Good on you. And thinking to your current career then, in terms of being on stage, one of the questions here, there's Rob, if you look at Rob Leewo's question, when you started doing stand-up, did you find you learned new ways of connecting with people? Is it something you might recommend to doctors to do to improve communication skills?
That's very, very interesting. I think that medicine is it's a communications job, and that's why I think we need to drop the A-level requirements. You don't want your doctor to be an idiot, obviously, but I don't think it's a job where you need to have all of these grade A's. No one's ever going to expect you to memorize and recite biochemical pathways. It's about a personal connection, and I think we need to be recruiting people who understand that and get that. I was the first year in my medical school to be taught communication skills as part of the syllabus. And it feels very odd that there were decades and decades and decades where it wasn't even touched upon. And in fact, I remember saying to a consultant, when you're a medical student, you trail around behind all the bosses, and I said, "Oh, sorry, I've got to dash off now. I've got my communication skills lecture." And a consultant said, "Communication skills? You can't teach that. What nonsense!" But that's honestly what some people thought. And I am now doing an awful lot more communication than I was, and I'm doubtless a better communicator. I'm lucky enough to get on stage. I'm lucky enough to be interviewed and to bang on about my various messages and bugbears. It has helped me, and I think it is worth the medical profession thinking wider about how you can improve communication.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think back to when we were told about George's cancer diagnosis. You need advice on that. You need to know how to do that in a, obviously it's compelling, compassionate way that will come naturally, but there's so much other stuff around it. You talked about mental health. There's so many layers to that role and that job.
There are. I absolutely agree. And I think even though doctors are now taught how to break bad news, and there's a huge amount of evidence about how to do it in an effective, in a compassionate way, and in a way that the people you're telling really understand it and remember it. And, there's a lot of evidence about that. That needs to be taught alongside how you as the doctor cope with what you've just done, because you learn in GCSE physics about every action having an equal and opposite reaction. In medicine, it's obviously never equal. It can't be a fraction, obviously, of the pain and anguish it causes a patient and their family, but there's always something comes back, and it's cumulative. When you've done that 20 times, or you've had 20 bad experiences, where we've lost a patient or something like that, it does really take its toll. And doctors do need to be taught how they themselves can look after themselves, because if they're not looking after themselves, there's no way they can look after their patients.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just from our side of the fence and seeing how, and we get to know, you talked about people remembering your name and all the people that helped them through their we're exactly the same. On the oncology theme, there's a question from Claire Walsh that's just come up. Love your work, Adam. My sister is an oncology nurse and is stunning how poorly nurses are paid. What actions could the public take to help those that care for us that are sickest, that are paid, to make sure they're paid appropriately?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And somehow nurses in particular always manage to avoid getting a pay increase, or somehow they're always the one whose bursaries get depleted, and I think it's absolutely shameful. Ultimately, you can make a difference by making a noise. These are decisions that are made by people right at the top, but the ministers are answerable to the MPs, and the MPs are answerable to constituents. And you can vote them in and you can vote them out, but also you can write to them about anything. That's their job, is to listen to you. And one of the wonderful things about social media in particular is it's very easy to mobilize large numbers of people on the same topic. And like, you see it often, like if an A&E department's being shut down or something, an MP can quite easily ignore one or two people who say, "What are you doing about this?" They can't ignore 300, 3,000, 10,000 people making some noise. And I think people forget quite how much power that they do have, and cumulatively what they can achieve.
Obviously, pay shouldn't be a matter of charity, but it just strikes me seeing you both on the screen here. Between you, you've raised over £2 million in support of the NHS via sort of charity donations, and that's long been, I guess, one of the ways in which we can support health. Do you think there's a continued role for charity alongside state funding for these services? And how does charity fit in? Adam, you're a trustee of a charity, and Vicky, obviously, you've set up a charity. Interested in your views.
In an ideal world, there would be adequate funding for everything that needed to happen. But we don't live in an ideal world, and until we do, there'll be a huge role for charity. For example, like the air ambulance in London is a charity that is all funded by donations. You know, Macmillan nurses, a huge amount of research happens through charities, and also a lot of the stuff that are just sort of lovely add-ons, you know, that aren't core, that are, you know, the gardens, you know, for patients and their families to enjoy in hospital, the coffee machine that the pediatric unit might otherwise not have. A lot of that is funded by charity. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to live in a world where we didn't need any charities, but we're not there, and I think there are, you know, tens of thousands of people in the charitable sector doing absolutely extraordinary work, and particularly helping the health service.
And Vicky, what about your experience?
Well, I was going to say, so for us, we never realised how underfunded childhood cancer was. We didn't realise that Cancer Research UK only give 1% to children and anyone under the age of 24, actually. We had no idea. So when we found that out, as most Googlers would feel, we're fixers, we're problem solvers. So we went into problem solving mode when we were dealing with the most catastrophic thing in our lives. It probably wasn't mental health wise the best thing to do, but we still do it to this day. And actually, as Adam, you were saying earlier about a let out and writing a diary, that it's kind of, and built using social media, we created an army around this problem to try and solve it. But in the meantime, exactly to your point, Adam, we're also coming at it top down, and we're working with Cancer Research UK, with politicians, and we're lobbying, and we're trying to do, coming at it from both angles, because you need to find somewhere in the middle ground, because there's not money to solve for absolutely everything. There never can be. You know, this ideal world really is so idyllic, and COVID has thrown so many more complications into things. But actually, if bottom up, we can fundraise and we can fulfill. You know, I think about the fact we've funded 2 play therapists that told my son he would wake up from surgery and he wouldn't be able to walk. You know, he was 4. For him to comprehend that was like, I can't even get my, how would you write that in your book, Adam? Like, I literally, how do you do this? So that's what our fundraising has done. But we do need to come at it from both angles, because fundamentally, the only way you're going to get change is by doing something. We could have sat and done nothing, but it actually helped us as well as an outlet. But it's hard work, and COVID makes it that much harder. You know, the Lullaby Trust, NHS Charities Together, the Giant Pledge. There are so many charities out there all doing great things. How do you then judge which one you give your money to? It's really difficult.
Thank you, Vicky, for sharing that as well. Look, we're almost out of time, and I think, you know, where we started was the stories that are in this book that touch us all, and our own personal experiences of the health service. And you've shared so much, and just shining the spotlight on how we can help. And, you know, there's a while still we've got to get through all of this. So, Vicky, thank you for sharing your story. And Adam, just before you go, a final word. Is there some optimism you can leave us with, something that we can turn to in the darker moments of what we're going through at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult time at the moment, but we do just have to realise that we will look back on this. We will look back on the worst days, and it will just be a memory. And it is just a case of, you know, getting through what are clearly tough times, because, you know, they will be all of our diary entries at some point in the future.
Adam, thank you for spending time with us, and thank you for all those works that have entertained us and opened our eyes to just the heroic work that's been done in the health service. We've got links to all of the books and where to go. Adam also has a website. You can find it using your favorite search engine, which has links to all of this stuff as well. I really would encourage a read. And if you can get to the stage show, then you know how to find that as well with the links below. But for now, Vicky, thank you for setting this up, and Adam Kane, enormous thanks for joining us back at Talks at Google. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.